some of the things that I used to enjoy, like I thought, hey, you can take the kids out and say, hey, let's go catch fiddler crabs to go catch the sheephead. And you get the kids out there chasing the little fiddler crabs, putting them in a little bucket, it's all part of it. It's just the expression on a kid's face. They're so happy. I don't see that when they're playing these games on a computer. It's a different smile. Yeah, I don't know. I can see a little difference when it's related to being outside and fishing than it is when you're sitting behind a computer playing a game.
This is the Tom Rowland Podcast. Fascinating stories to amaze, encourage, and inspire you in fishing, fitness, and the outdoors. And we're brought to you by Black Rifle Coffee. I started this podcast as a way to connect with my friends, people that I admire and respect, and you. It has been a learning journey that's made me a better person, a better fisherman, a better father, and a better athlete. I'm so happy that you're on this journey with me, and I'd love to hear from you with show suggestions, guest suggestions, or questions. The best way to get a hold of me is through text. You can text 305-930-7346 for the fastest response, but if you prefer to email, you can send that to podcast@saltwaterexperience.com. That's a dedicated email address just for the show. If you like this show, you can show your support by posting about it on social media and tagging me. Text the link to a couple of friends that may also enjoy it, and subscribe and leave a 5-star review if you feel like I've earned it. The website is tomrowlandpodcast.com, and that is where everything lives. All past shows, you can go and listen to any show. You can look up all the different shows that we've done, both the How To Tuesdays, the full links, and the physical Fridays. They all live on tomrowlandpodcast.com. And the social media is Tom_Rowland, ROWLAND, on Instagram, or you can go to our big account, Saltwater_Experience. I hope to hear from you soon. So now, let's get on to today's show.
I'm Capt Sergio Atanes, and this is the Tom Rowland Podcast.
All right, Sergio, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. Just a little difficulty here in trying to get hooked up with you this morning.
That's okay. That's technology. That's how it happens sometimes. But you got a nice studio there.
Oh, yeah, it's nice. Before I was trying to use the big computer. This one worked perfect last night. It's my laptop that I use for doing this, and this morning it wouldn't let me in.
Okay. Well, tell me what you do in that studio. What kind of things do you do there?
Well, in this studio, some of the stuff that I do is I do the Monday night podcast that I do on Facebook and YouTube live. Mm-hmm. And then I do a lot of photography here for a lot of my sponsors, a lot of pictures that I take to put into the websites or into some of the TV shows, and stuff like that. And it's my way to get away from everybody else. I'm totally separate. It's a separate building from my house. Because if I'm in the house, I don't care if I have a separate room. You know how it is. People are going to walk in and the dogs will bark. So this is a little over 400 square feet. I got it insulated with soundproofing stuff to try to keep the noise out. And I kind of get in here and get away from everything.
Nice. Well, so you got your television show. Tell me about your television show.
Well, actually, years ago, story way back in the 90s, I used to do some stuff for Bright House down here. It used to be one of the local stations. And I was doing an American TV show. And at the same time, I was doing radio for 1040 ESPN. I was doing their radio show for about 10, 12, 14 years. And then about 12 years ago, one of the Spanish stations came to me and said, hey, nobody's doing a Spanish TV show, fishing show. There's somebody in Miami or Keys that do one for a month or two. They run out of money, and then that's it. So I hooked up with a guy that used to do everything for Telemundo in Washington, D.C. He moved down here, was starting his own company, decided to go on out in his own. And we started a Spanish TV show. And that just grew. And then last year, some of my sponsors came and said, hey, streaming is the way to go. I think TV, why don't you try to put some of the shows on streaming, and why don't you do some American stuff, with our product. So my first episode started in January this year in English, and actually I was amazed that a lot of the streaming stations were very interested in the Spanish show because they didn't have anything in Spanish.
Right.
If you think about it, I mean, you don't see it. And the Hispanics here in the United States, they're pretty affluent. They have a lot of money. Well, you were at the Miami Boat Show.
Sure.
Like I was over there, and I was amazed. I sold about 7 boats, helping my sponsor out, and it was just amazing.
Wow.
And they got money.
So tell me about the difference when you first were doing the stuff with Bright House in English, and then when you first started to think about going to a Spanish TV show. Like you were, what did you change anything, or did you do everything exactly the same? You just did it in Spanish, or what was the process there?
The big problem when you switch to Spanish is you don't have the availability like you do in English. In other words, I've got 155 captains in my computer that I use for a lot of my corporate stuff. So I got a lot of captains I can call up and do shows with. In Spanish, you have there's not a lot of Spanish captains. Mm. And then you got some that have Spanish names that can't speak Spanish. Then you have some that say they're Spanish and it's terrible Spanish. Not that mine is fantastic, but I mean, it's just, so it makes it tougher to do the Spanish shows than it does the American shows, so to speak, because I have such a broad selection on the American side, where in Spanish I have a doctor that I do a lot of shows with down around Boca Grande and Pine Island, that he's a Spanish guy. And then I have a local guy that's a great angler, but he's not a captain, but he fishes all the time and he hunts all the time. And so, a lot of the times when we go to we go to Louisiana or stuff like that, like the doctor just goes up there with me, mm-hmm. because there ain't no Spanish people up there. Right. Now, some of my clients will go, they'll go do the trip with me, and some of them can speak Spanish, but again, it makes it a lot tougher than on the English side. But the other side to that is, in Spanish we have more fun than we do in English.
You do? Like the language lends itself to more fun conversations. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. What it is, and when I'm doing the show with, let's say I have you on the boat, and let's say you're a novice, or you're just an average guy. You do something that's not right. All I can say is, Tom, we do it this way, and stuff like that. You got to be nice. Where in Spanish, it's the culture. I can just say, Tom, stop being stupid about it and do it this way. And you'll come back to me with a smart remark. But it's not being rude. It's the culture. And I guess that's why a lot of the people although they're like me, they're bilingual, they love to see the show in Spanish because of the kidding that goes on.
Yeah.
You can do that. And it's not being disrespectful or anything like that. You just do things in Spanish that you normally don't do on the American shows, because it might not sound right.
I got you. So what about your history with the Spanish language? How did you become so fluent in Spanish?
Well, I was born in Cuba, but I came over when I was a year old, and I grew up in Ybor City. And in my household, I was not allowed to speak English, because my mother said, you're going to school to learn the American language. When you come home, we don't want you to know the Spanish language. So when you walked in the front door in my house, you had to speak Spanish. I mean, if you came in with a cut that needed 4 stitches, bleeding all over the place, and you were screaming in English, my mother wouldn't pay attention to me until I switched over to Spanish. And I guess that's what helped me over the years to, what got me so hooked on fishing was when I was about 4.5 years old, my uncle came from Cuba to live with us. And he loved to fish, and he was 18. Mm-hmm. He lived with us for a little over a year before he got an invitation from Uncle Sam back in the 50s. It was a little thing called the draft.
Yeah.
And of course, he was 18, came to the U.S., was living with us. He got drafted when he was about 19 and a half. But he got me so hooked on fishing at the age of about 4.5 that I never put a rod down. And when kids were getting in trouble in the summer, kids now have everything. But if you go back to my era, when I was growing up in the 50s, I mean, first thing, we didn't have a TV in my house till I was about 8 years old. Couldn't afford it. What we did is you rode around. My mother didn't have enough money. This was, poor neighborhoods. Let's face it. You couldn't buy. I wanted a bicycle for Christmas. My mother couldn't afford my father a brand new bike because the only place you could buy one was Sears.
Yeah.
And Sears wanted like $21. Well, that's a fortune. So there was a guy in the neighborhood that would go around getting old bicycles, and he would sand them down, spray paint them with a can of paint, clean them up a little bit, and he sold them for $6. And that's what I got for Christmas one year.
Nice.
A black bicycle. And I was the most proud kid, but I wasn't the only one. Everybody in the neighborhood, that's the way it was. You didn't look at somebody. Nobody had a new bike. Nobody could afford a new bike. So when we started fishing, he got me so hooked. The way I got really hooked, my first summer with him, and everybody knows Boca Grande, I presume.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the 50s, the old phosphate dock was actually there. Now you see a lot of TV shows where they go where the phosphate dock used to be in the pilings, and they get all these Goliath grouper and all that. When I was growing up, the phosphate dock was actually there. It was like a pier. The middle of the pier was covered and had a conveyor belt, and the ship would anchor dock at the end of this long pier, and they would load it, whatever. Well, I didn't know why, because you were so young, until you get a little older and you realize this, but we would go almost every Friday night after work. My uncle would be ready to go. And before I get to that, is that one of the best baits in those days, which nobody uses anymore because it's too expensive, you couldn't afford it anyway, was shedder crabs. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
The soft shell.
Yeah, but people maybe other people aren't. So that's a soft shell crab.
It's a soft shell crab inside the hard shell.
Mm-hmm.
It's called a shedder because it's going to get ready to shed its shell. Then it's a soft shell crab. Then it becomes what we used to call a cardboard crab because it's kind of in between. And then it became a hard crab again. Well, the way you caught these things back in those days, in Tampa, you got Bayshore Boulevard, which is about 7 miles long. My uncle we used to go through Three-Bore City, and as they were re-roofing the homes, all those homes had tin roofs. So he would go through and pick up all the good pieces of tin that weren't rusted out, take them home, and he cut them 30 inches long with the tin snip. And you made like a half-moon circle out of this little piece of tin. And he would go out to Bayshore Boulevard at low tide at night, and you would put these tins in there right about, at low tide, you want them to be about 6 inches underwater at the top of the tin. High tide might be 2 foot deep. And he would put them about every 10 feet apart for about 3 blocks and then stagger them and come back the other way. He must have had at one time like 100 tins out there.
Wow.
And then he would go there at night with low tide. And I would go with him in the summer. And you walk through there at night with a Coleman lantern and 2 galvanized buckets, a little one that was tied to me, and the big one was tied to him. And you went to every tin and lifted up and scooped it. Well, there was either a shedder crab or a soft shell crab. Because what happens when the crab gets ready to molt, it has to find protection. Because when it's soft, anything can eat it. Mm-hmm. So what they do, they get under the tin, cover both ends of the tin up. And they were there until they got hard, and then they just moved back out. So when you picked up the tin, if there was a crab there, it had to be a shedder, it was going to be a soft shell. So if it was a soft shell, we put it in my little bucket that was floating behind me. The shedder crab, he would put it in the big, and then we'd take it home. And what he would do is, my mother hated him for this. He'd get the bottom crisper, the old refrigerator, and you put a layer of damp newspaper, and you would put a layer of crabs. a layer of damp newspaper, a layer of crabs. And by Friday night, he would have about 3 to 4 dozen nice shitter crabs, and we would have 2 dozen soft shells to eat. Then the big thing was somebody in the family gave him an old Nash Rambler. In those days, we have these fancy coolers now, these Yetis and these Ingles and Igloo. In those days, there was the old Coleman metal that rusted out. So what he would do is he'd take out the back seat of the old Nash Rambler, and he put a cushion in the middle on the hump for me to sit on. And on each side of me, he would have 2 20 gallons, a gallon of garbage can, galvanized can. And he would go to the fish market Friday on the way home, and they would fill these 2 garbage cans up with flake ice. And I would sit in the middle between these 2 with a blanket. And him and his buddy would sit in the front seat, and we usually had 2 more cars that followed us. And we go to Placida and get the last ferry boat, because there was no bridges in those days to Boca Grande. We got the last ferry boat into Boca Grande. And here's the part that it took me a few years to catch on. There was a guy in Ybor City in those days, and I'm sure in most towns, I guess, you had the laundry man used to come around the neighborhood and pick up your laundry and then leave it for the people who had a little more money, just like the milkman did. You had the little container. And this guy was called Chino Lavandero, which means that the Chinaman that was a laundry guy. But the guy was an American. I don't know why they called him this. But he was the biggest drunk. I can remember this. And they would take him with them. Every weekend in the summer, I would go. This guy would go in one of the cars, and they'd take like 3 or 4 bottles of rum with him. Well, what happened was we would go out there we get to Boca Grande. He would play cards and drink with the security guy at the phosphate dock, and we would go on the dock and fish.
You weren't supposed to?
I don't know. I don't ever want to ask. Okay.
Right. I got you.
But in those days, that's how you did things. So I remember we used to get there about 9:30 because the boat got there about 9 o'clock. And they played cards about 4:30 in the morning, and we would fish. And I mean, in those days with shitter crab, it was nothing to catch a 40-pound redfish or a 30-pound grouper off the dock. But the problem was, if anybody knows Boca Grande Pass, that current is terrible there. I mean, just terrible. So what they did is they got a piece of old anchor line, and they tie it around my waist, and they tie it to the railing with just enough rope that if I fell over, my feet would dangle in the water, but somebody could grab the rope and bring me back up on the
How many times did you fall over?
I never fell over, but I can tell you one day, I think this was going on for that first summer, towards the end of the summer. One of his buddies was over. You remember that he was 18, 19, and his buddies are in the same age. Jokingly, they didn't know my mother was in the other room, and she could overhear the conversation. And he's telling my uncle, boy, I hope Sergio, Sergio, never falls over. We have to bring him up with, oh man, my mother heard that. She chased my uncle out the front door, and I thought she was going to kill him. But that's how I grew up. So after he got drafted and went into the Army, I had a couple of years that I had to do everything on my own. But that was okay because all summer long, I lived on the corner of 9th Avenue and 21st Street, which is right now everybody comes to Ybor City. It ain't the Ybor City that I grew up in. Now it's all bars and, nightclubs. When I was growing up, you had Walgreens, Crest, you had a Bill Clinzy store, you had the shoe store, and you had a lot of the stores that sold linoleum in those days because I lived in a shotgun house, and you know what a shotgun house is.
Yeah. Yeah, but tell people what it is. We have them in Key West.
Yeah, and I didn't know what a shotgun house was until I got older and somebody says, oh, you lived in a shotgun house. But all it was a house that it had a wall down the middle and 2 doors on each side of this. When you went up to the porch, and there was a door on the right, door on the left. And you opened that door, you had a living room. There was another door, was the first bedroom. You open another door, it was the second bedroom. Then when you open the other door, that was the kitchen. And in the kitchen, there was 2 doors. One on the left, that was a bathroom door right in the kitchen. And the other door took you to the backyard. And the reason they called it a shotgun house is you can open all the doors and shoot a shotgun through the front door and go out straight to the back.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a duplex, but that's the way they were made.
I wonder why that was so popular, because those you see those in Key West too. Still to this day, you can see the shotgun houses.
It was cheap to build.
Yeah, that's probably what it was.
All wood frame, and that's why you had I think there was like 3 stores, and some of the buildings they're all still there. Linoleum was real popular because the wood floors. All you did is put a piece of linoleum on it, and about 3 years later you wore it out. And the guy would come over, you tell him the size, it would come over, take the old one out and roll the new one on. It wasn't glued on or nothing. I mean, you got to understand basics, I mean, in those days, we used to use perfection heaters, which was a round heater, kerosene heater, had a wick in the middle and glass in the middle. So you use it also as a light at night. And there was 2 in my house, one for my bedroom and one for my parents' bedroom. And if you went to watch or you went to the living room, you took it with you. If you went to the kitchen, you took it with you. There was no central heat. There was no air. There was nothing. I mean, remember, this is Ybor City. But I wouldn't trade anything that I had in those days. The school that I went to, it was Most Holy Name. It was a little Catholic school. It was about 4 blocks from the house. And this hard-headed Cuban, I thank them for the person I am today and my parents, because they, in those days, it isn't like now, they didn't put up with any bull. I mean, you were doing something wrong in the classroom, and that nun would look at you, move her little finger, that means go outside the door, and you got the living daylight slapped out of you. And you didn't go home and tell your mother that the nun hit you, because if I did that, then my mother would beat the crap out of me because I did something wrong. And I remember that, especially during the summer months, April and May, those nuns, the convent was right next to the little school. The school just, when I graduated, there was 13 graduated from the 8th grade, 7 girls and 6 boys. But the nuns would have to work around the convent, all the little, the little plants and all that stuff. So every week, one of the grades, and they started with like the 4th grade. 4th graders would go in and help the nun that Saturday from 8:30 to about 12 o'clock around the yard. And then the next week was the 5th grader. Well, I remember one year, this Cuban decided, I wanted to do something else. And I didn't show up for my day to help the nun. And about 1 o'clock, Sister Mary comes walking to my house because everything's walking distance. We didn't even have a car in those days or anything like that. And she comes in. Of course, my mother says right away, "Oh, Sister Mary," in Spanish, "Come on in." That. And they're talking. And she says, "Everything okay?" She says, "Well, Sergio didn't show up today. He was supposed to help out." And when my mother called, my father never would touch me. My mother's the one that beat the heck out of me. When my mother called, you came running. And in those days, it isn't like now. There's no cell phones or nothing. You open the front door, she screamed my name, and buddy, we passed it on to each other. If I couldn't hear it, somebody else heard it. They would pass it on down like a cell phone. Yeah. I come running, and I saw Sister Mary, and I said, "Oh, crap." And my mother said, "You didn't show up today." I said, I know. So she tells Sister Mary, "Do you still need help in the yard?" She said, "I could use them for a little while." So my mother said, "Okay." But now here's the part that's why I never skipped another Saturday in my life. My mother didn't just say, "Go with Sister Mary." My mother came up to me, grabbed my ear, handed the ear to the nun. The nun grabbed my ear, and for 4 blocks, she walked me down to the convent with my ear in her hand like this. And my buddies are looking, "Oh, look at that." Well, let me tell you, that never happened again. This little Cuban, when my Saturday came up, I was there with bells on. But I guess that's made me the person I am today. That it's the culture. In those days, my mother said, the nun's always going to be right. Remember that, because the nun's not going to do something to you unless you didn't do what you were supposed to do. And in my house, buddy, my mother was the law.
Do you
But
think that?
again,
Do you think that helped you with work ethic, or like you've mentioned it a couple of times that it helped you to become the person that you are? What else do you think that it helped you with?
Coming from in those days, I don't know what I think people were getting paid. Like I said, I was too young to know, but and people were getting paid maybe, I don't know, 40 cents an hour. Is that, I guess, yeah, 40, 50 cents an hour. So, everything was expensive. To go to the movies, the Ritz Theater was right there. There was a Spanish theater and a Ritz Theater, and it's still there on the corner of 15th Street and 7th Avenue, and it was 15 cents to go in. Well, that's a lot of money. So I think between the nuns, my mother, and God, I met some old man, and I don't remember how I met him to this day, but I just remember Tampa Cigar Factory was right catty corner to us on 9th Avenue. There was a lot of cigar factories in the area, but Tampa was the closest one. And I met this guy, and this old man, and he just told me on Fridays on the way home from school, he always told me, go to the third truck door. There was like 4 or 5 truck doors where the trucks were back in. And he said, knock 4 times. And I would knock 4 times. And the door would open up, and this huge truck door would open up about maybe 2 feet. And this box would get shoved out. I think I met this guy. I saw his face one time in my life. But that's the way. And in there would be anywhere between 10 to 20 or 25 broken cigars that came off the machine, because those were being machine made. And I would take them home. And the ones that were really bad, I'd take them apart. The ones that were just bent, I straightened them out. And the ones that were kind of worse, I straightened them out as much as I could. Take leaves from the other ones, lick it around that cigar. Now, in those days, cigars were a nickel. So I would stand in the corner of 7th Avenue and 21st Street and sell the cigars for a penny on Friday afternoon. And I could sell 8, 10, 12, sometimes 15. Well, there was my money. My mother would give me my 15 cents. I had no money for my Coke and my popcorn sometimes. So it was great. Like I said, so I think God was watching me all the time doing that. And then when my uncle came back from the Army, he lived with us for about another year, and then he got married. But again, at that time, I was a little older. I was probably about 9 by then, closer to 10. We would come back from fishing, and in those days, you could black drum now down here. They're kind of limited. People say, In those days, black drum, people ate them. And we would go to Gandy Bridge and fish all night Friday night or all night Saturday. And we would catch 15, 20 big black drum and some redfish and some trout. And he, on the next morning, like Sunday morning, he would put a bunch of ice in my wagon and throw a bunch of fish in there. And I would go walking up to 12th Avenue and all through that neighborhood. And I would sell probably $3 worth of fish.
Wow.
Well, $3 in those days, that was a day's pay. And then he would give me a quarter. Hey, I had money for next week to go to the movies. And so, I guess that's how I grew up, having to appreciate what a dollar was worth, what a nickel was worth.
And having to work for it as well.
That's right. And my mother's philosophy was, you don't ever take anything unless you earn it. If somebody gives you something, you work for it. Because, you can make it on your own, but you got to do it. And the other thing she used to tell me is, remember, you're not going to catch any fish. You're not going to make any money sitting on the sofa. That was her thing. And it's true. So, I guess as I grew up and went into the business world and the corporate world, a lot of things helped me to get to where I'm at today. I had one of the best after that when I went to my first real full-time job in a wholesale company, and I was working in the warehouse, and I went up to the counter. Eventually, I became salesman, and eventually I became vice president of the company. The chairman of the board, I remember his office was like downstairs, and it was one of those dark offices with all this mahogany in those days. This is like 68, 69.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of got a liking to me. And like I said, I think this is God's always helping me out. He would call me sometime. He knew I was busting my chop at helping the clients that would come in to pick up stuff and all that needed them in a hurry. And he would tell my boss, I need to see Sergio for a little bit. So, chairman of the board, yes, sir. I would go down there, and he said, would you do me a favor, Sergio? I said, yeah. He said, would you go down here and get me a goodies hamburger for me? And he gave me a $5 bill, and he gave me the keys to his brand new Pontiac Bonneville. and then he said, and buy you one. And that was his way of saying, hey, thank you for what you do. But he had, I'll never forget, in the back of his desk, this huge picture of a boat sinking. Looked like the Titanic sinking. And I always looked at that big ship and he was always trying to teach me something. That was his way of doing stuff. And then about the fourth, fifth time I was in there, he says, you're always looking at that picture, don't you? He says, that picture's to remind me of something. He says, and if I can ever remind you of something, I want you to think of that picture. And he says, you know what that picture represents? I said, yeah, it's a boat sinking. He said, no. He says, when you're in business, remember, a small leak can sink a big ship. Watch your expenses. Watch the way you move money, how you do it with money, because that can cost you your life, your business. And you know what? It's true. After that, all my life, I was always careful of what I did. And I didn't, my mother's thinking was, don't worry what the neighbors got. What you have, make sure you can afford it and that you feel comfortable. Don't worry that he's got a bigger house or he's got a nicer car. That isn't important. Important is that you can live your life and feel comfortable. And I took all these little things as I was growing up, and I applied it as I worked into my fishing part of the business. And I got my captain's license in 75, but I didn't want to do charters. I got forced into it by my friends because, you're working all week. You go out on Saturday. And, of course, in those days, it was all grouper fishing. It wasn't light tackle. And in the 70s and 80s, everybody went offshore. Mm-hmm. And I remember, number one is I tell everybody, okay, we're going to leave my house at 5:30. Well, some guy used to show up at 6. So I got to the point I say, I'm leaving at 5:30. If you're not here, you're not coming. Then it's Saturday. I knew I had to get home, get home at a reasonable time. The wife wanted to go out, but you always had that one or two guys of the three that went with me is, oh, come on, man, the bite's really good. Let's stay out another hour. Come on. Then we get home at 6:30. My wife is waiting. The boat needed to be cleaned, all this fish. And of course, two guys, one guy was always very good, but the other two guys, oh man, it's getting late. I got to get on home, this and that. And I finally said, you know what? And then they would complain. I mean, gas was, I think I was paying back in those days like $1 a gallon back in the 80s, something like that, 80s, whatever. You would burn 30 gallons, so it was $24. And then $10 in bait and the truck. So I would say, look, guys, we spent $50 today on an all-day grouper trip. My boat, my tackle, my truck, but I'll still split it 4 ways. So it's $12.50 a piece. And they would complain. Oh my God, Jesus. So finally one day I said, you know what, that's it. I told this other guy, I said, so when they started calling me, I said, hey, the going rate now is $300 to go out. What? I said, hey, that's what my buddies are getting, the other captains. They're getting $300 a day. That's what we got to get. And, and they kind of forced me into doing that. I still had one or two friends that we just go out. But I got rid of all these other friends that all they wanted to do was go out and on a fishing trip and not pay anything.
Right. And so is that how you made the transition into fishing all the time? With like that story and just kind of moving into now you're getting 300 a day for it? And
no, I had I've always had the two jobs. I only had 3 jobs in my life, and that first company eventually sold out, and I went to 2 other companies, and God gave me this talent that I could motivate people and do stuff. So I actually became vice president of 2 different companies without a college education because I had no money to go to college. The only knowledge I had was hard knocks from the street, but I could motivate people. I could increase sales and get things going. And in the 80s and 90s, companies could look at you and see that. Now, you got to have that little college paper. And I saw more people come through when I was running these companies with 4 years of education that didn't know beans. I mean, they had no idea. They just had a piece of paper.
Right.
So, and I think now it's a lot harder to do it. But I always took care of my family. I figured, okay, the day I retire, I want to make sure that I can really enjoy what I'm doing. So I did all of this kind of on the side for years. And then 18 years ago, I finally said, okay, that's it. I just quit, walked off.
What was that like to make that decision and make that jump?
Man, let me tell you, it's tough. It's tough when for 30-something years you never owned a car. You always got a company car every couple of years. To have an expense account. Your insurance was paid for, making really good money. And to say, I'm going to give all this up just to do fishing. But it's like my cardiologist and my Spanish guy that does the TV shows with me. We've been friends for 25 years. And he told me, he's always after me, Sergio, your job is very stressful. Because it was. I mean, the part that I ran in the business, it kept me stressed out. He said, it's going to give you a heart attack. You need someday to do something different. And it was tough to make the change. But once I made the change, what made the transition easy was that I didn't owe any money. I was smart enough to pay everything. So the day I retired, everything I had was mine. I didn't have to get up in the morning and say, gee, how do I make a mortgage payment, or how do I make a boat payment?
Did you already have a boat? You had a boat already?
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
I already, I used to, that's one of the things I did spoil myself. I mean, I was hooked up with Mako back in the 70s and the local dealer. So about every 3 years I used to get a new Mako and kept swapping them out. And then I think right when I was still working, I got hooked up with Marine Max in their heydays before the 2008 crash came.
Mm-hmm.
So for a bunch of years, I did a lot of stuff on the weekends. I helped them do some tournaments and helped them with the boat shows. And in return, they gave me a Boston Whaler to use every year. So that was a good swap. I mean, They didn't pay me, but I got a free boat to use, and I kept it at home. And then when I retired, I already had the money to buy a brand new boat. And that's what I did. And after that, I got hooked up with a big sponsor. And now it's like, just every year I get a boat. But what I tell everybody, because at these boat shows that I'm at, I got a lot of these young kids that come over and say, hey, man, I want to retire, Captain. I want to quit my job. I got my captain's license. I said, don't do that. I said, because first thing is make sure that you're settled. Things are like you want it. Make sure you have money put away. Remember, you're going to have $50,000 in the bank. You're going to use $50,000 if you quit.
Right.
And start. Everybody thinks, I'm a captain. I'm going to charge $600-$700 now, and I'm going to get rich. No, you don't. I mean, you got in the Tampa Bay area, for example, because of Sea School, there's over 360 captains. They have a captain's license.
Right.
A lot of them part-time. I think full-time there's maybe 80 or 90. But when you figure, when I got my captain's license in 1975, I went with 2 other guys, and that made 4 of us in Tampa Bay. So it's really tough now if you're getting started, unless you already got to build in,
Right.
I got all my clients over the years, and that's what I tell them. You got to build your client base And then anytime there's a crunch, I see it. Guys losing their boats, they lose their trucks. I've seen some get divorces because their wife won't put up with it. And it's a shame. It's a wonderful life, but you got to make sure that you're prepared for it.
It's a wonderful life if you have it set up properly. Like you're saying that you didn't have any debt and that you were in a position to move forward. A lot of people get into the position to where they've got to work, 24 days a month to cover their nut of this new boat and this new truck that they have. And you can do that, except that it's hard to get 24 days a month for somebody that's just starting out.
And it also helps if you got a very loving and trusting wife. She worked. She retired from the VA, so she put in 42 years, and she's the one that told me 18 years ago, I'm going to work for another 5 or 6 years. Quit. I want you to do it now while you're young enough that you can really enjoy it, and not wait till you get much older. So
yeah,
the secret is make sure that first thing is this is what you want to do. What I've seen over the years too, because we all love to fish, and some of these younger kids, they're thinking, man, fishing. It's totally different to start doing charters.
Yeah.
Because now you're not fishing, you're catering. And to me, to be a good captain, you're just not a captain. You got to be an entertainer.
Right. That's such an important thing to think about. And when a lot of people ask me about getting into guiding and stuff like that, it's like, okay, first thing that I start to talk to them about is, do you enjoy teaching people? Do you enjoy like teaching people and entertaining people? Because that's really what it is. You will, if you're looking to fish, becoming a charter captain is the best way to not fish as much as you're currently fishing, because you just don't fish. A good captain, good guide fishes very, very little. I mean, especially if you're fishing 300 days a year, you maybe got a few days that you could actually go fishing. And on the charters, you're not fishing. I mean, maybe occasionally you're hooking a fish and giving it to somebody, but for the most part, you're not doing that. So a lot of people get discouraged with guiding because they thought they were going to be out there fishing, and it turns out they hadn't touched a rod in weeks, And but what you're talking about is such a good point about being an entertainer and being somebody that is there for the customer in a bigger capacity than just catching fish. Like you are there to entertain.
Yeah, because the biggest thing is when you go out on your own, and let's say the average guy, he goes out there every Saturday. Well, he goes on Saturday, catches some fish, and sometimes he does real good, sometimes he does slow. But when you're taking somebody out and you're charging them money, you got to try to give them the best time you can. And, you can't make fish bite. I've had days where people think I can walk on water because we've gotten to a snook spot and sat there for an hour and 30 minutes and caught 35 snook. And I've had days where an hour and a half into the trip and I got one fish. So, when things start to slow down, then you got to start thinking, how are you going to entertain these people?
So how do you do it? How do you entertain the people? And what is your, like, I have like when I think about guided trips, I have like a hierarchy, and like one is safety. We're going to go out there. We're going to come back safe. Nobody's going to get hurt. The second is that everybody has a good time. Right. And then way down the list somewhere is that we catch fish. And if all of these first ones if you're taking care of all these first ones, then you're going to end up catching more fish, because as soon as somebody gets hurt, you got to go back to the dock. As soon as somebody's not having a good time, they're never coming back to you. I would just wonder how you think about that.
Well, I first thing is when they get in my boat, I tell them, look, it isn't going to sink in. If God forbid, if the boat breaks in half, I said, just jump over the side and walk to shore. I said, but here's where the life preservers are. Although I do probably all my charters, I'm not into offshore charters. I like backcountry, the flats. And I mean, I go out, me personally, offshore to film, to do some snapper shows and all that. But I love the snook and the redfish, and I like to do some kingfish near shore. I always tell them, here's where the life preservers are. I have my own. I got an EPIRB. I kind of tell them, look, in case something goes wrong, this is how you do it. This is how you're going to start the motor. This is that, in case something happens to me. And then from there, then, we go through. But a lot of times, we're on the mangroves, and you get people that don't know what they're doing. And you got to understand this. This is where I see a lot of captains. I've had people go out with me and say, man, I really enjoy going out with you. I went out with this one guy. He started cussing at me because he told me, you have to know how to word things sometimes to get your message across. So, and this happens to me quite a bit. So I use this technique a lot when we're fishing along the mangroves and it's a little windy. And I like to use like a popping cork sometimes, or just the white bait. I always tell them when I get to the spot, because you can tell the client right away how he's going to be. You can tell the guy that, number one, you got the guy that lies to you. It says, oh, he knows how to fish. And when you give him the rod and he holds it upside down, you say, uh-oh. And then you got the guy that says, no, Captain, I fish very little. Or I got the guy that says, no, I don't saltwater fish, but I'd stripe it, bass fish, and do all this other stuff. So you know how to treat them. But first thing is when I get to the mangroves and I know the wind's to our back, and I tell them, guys, from my experience all these years, let me tell you, I've never caught any snook on the mangroves. They've all been under the mangroves in the water. So they kind of look at me and then start to laugh. But what I'm telling them is, don't cast high, don't cast hard. But I'm telling them in a way that it's funny to them, and it kind of stays in their mind, because all of a sudden, I'm not telling them not to do this. I'm just telling them, hey, this is what's going to happen. You're not going to catch any fish. And same way when we do a lot of dock fishing this time of the year, because we get these negative tides. So we catch a lot of redfish under residential docks. Mm-hmm. And it's the first thing I do when I get the boat there. I like to, a lot of the captains will get on the outside of the dock. But what I find is, especially in the older neighborhoods, although there's new homes there now, they tore down the old homes. Back in the 60s, when that area was being built, there was no EPA or nothing. So the builders would just dump a lot of rubble right there. And actually then they would build the dock on top of it. Mm-hmm. So I know where these rubble piles are, and I know that's going to hold the snook and some redfish and flounder and sheephead. So I tell them the same thing. And I don't like to fish the end, because I find that most of the stuff is underneath the dock. So what I do is I actually use my power pole and an anchor. I'll drop the anchor in between the two docks. And I don't know how it is in other areas, but in my area, the houses aren't that far apart. I mean, mm-hmm. Lots are not that big. So there's probably maybe 50 feet between the dock, maybe 70 mm-hmm. most. So I drop the anchor in the middle, on the edge of the little channel. I back up the boat between the two docks, and I get almost 10 feet from their shoreline, and I drop the power poles. Now they can fish either side of either one of the docks, but I tell them the same thing. Guys, all my years of experience, I've never caught any fish on top of the dock. They're all under the dock, under the dock. And it's fun, because once in a while, the guy will say, oh, Captain, I think I really messed up. At that point, I think with some other captains, especially with a guy that's done it 2 or 3 times, they get mad and you can't. So what I do is I tell them, look, it's tough to do. I still go up on the dock myself. Why don't you let me get it under there for you until you think you got the hang of it, and then you try it. But this way, I can give you more fishing time instead of tying time. And you know what? Most of them, they'll get the hang of it, and they watch me, and I tell them, look, it's soft, swing it sideways, do it this. Some docks are higher, it's easier to get under. I got some docks that are, 5 feet from the water, the bottom of the dock, and it's tough for somebody not used to it. The thing is, you're educating them, you're not getting them upset, and they're learning anyway. So, and I have fun with them. And then after you get to know them for a while, you get to know the personalities. You can tell after they've been on the boat an hour. You got some that are couples, sometimes they're more serious type. So you kind of go that way. then you have some that like to joke and tell jokes and do that. So you kind of, go.
Yeah, you got to read the crowd just like a comedian. You have to kind of read the room and understand who you're talking to and what kind of trip that they want.
And then a lot of times, and I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, every trip I do is fantastic. I can have some bad trips. I mean, it happens. And at that point, you're trying to entertain. You kind of try to get them to talk a little bit. What do you do? You're down here on vacation, and then that gets it opened up, and that gives you a little bit of breathing time to maybe see what you can do different to get the bike to turn on, or sometimes you just have to move. And I've moved 25 feet, not getting in a bite here, moved 25 feet down the road, and they're biting like crazy.
Mm-hmm. So on your TV show, what's the format that you're using? Is it an educational show or more of kind of adventure?
It's a little bit of everything. We try to educate a little bit about the tackle that we're using and why we're using that, and then we sometimes talk about the water temperature and how it affects the fishing, what time of the year, and then to me it gets boring if you see somebody just pulling one fish after another. I mean, it's boring. I mean, how many fish do you want to see somebody else pull out? So we try to catch some fish, and in between that, we talk about the methods and the baits that we're using, and everything. So we're trying to educate, but also watching us catch some fish. And we're not one that we have put some shows out there that has been a real slow day, and we said it. It was a real slow day. We really had to work hard, but we made it happen. We didn't get 25 fish today. We got 6 fish, but we had to work hard. And this is the reason why. We had this cold front come through.
Mm-hmm.
We have this pretty blue sky. We have a high pressure. We start talking about negative tides, what causes negative tides down here, how it affects the fishing, the barometer. So you kind of, when you have a bad day, you try to educate them a little bit on why it's a bad day.
Right.
Not just because the fish didn't want to bite. Also, the weather played a factor on why the fish aren't biting.
Yeah.
But in between all of that, my goal has always been for about the last 20 years. And last year, I've been pushing it really hard, and it worked out good. I'm trying to get kids involved, young kids, because the future of what we do is kids. But
how are you doing that? How are you getting kids involved?
Well, at a lot of the boat shows, I manage the seminars and everything. So I'm trying to gear somewhere we encourage the parents, and we do one for the parents and the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Last year in June, Picnic Island over here, which is a place where there's a little beach inside Tampa Bay and a little fishing pier, a little boat ramp. I did a 5-hour fishing class, hands-on, on the beach area. And actually, we had a lot of the sponsors donated product. We had the mayor of Tampa come and help, the FWC, CCA, and they all set up booths. And I gave away 153 rods and reels to kids and fed them all and their parents. The only catch was, it was all free. You had to be with your child.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want the parent coming over and dumping their 9 or 10-year-old kid. Oh, for 3 or 4 hours, I don't know. The idea was, I'm trying to get the kids away from the computers, from the stupid things, and expose them to the outdoors. And I got so many nice emails the following month after that from, especially I was amazed, a lot of the mothers saying their daughters were really hooked on fishing. And now they kept asking their parents, when we're going to go, can you take me this Saturday? And this is what I wanted. I wanted to get kids from playing those games on the computer out of that room and get them to do something with their time. That's what kept me out of trouble when I was growing up in Ybor City. I was so focused on the fishing side of it that I didn't have time to get in trouble.
Right.
And a lot of my friends got in trouble in Ybor City because there was nothing to do. And the same thing here. If you get kids occupied doing something they like, that'll keep them out of trouble. It's when they have too much free time. And to me, I hate to say it, people are going to get mad at me. A lot of these games that they're playing, they're killing. It's all this war stuff.
Yeah.
Well, like my mother would say from the old school, you're kind of indoctrinating the kids that, hey, they're killing something all the time. So if a kid's a kind of borderline, maybe, I mean, this is my thinking, a borderline, this could kind of just trigger him to go over the top. I'm probably 100% off, but get them away from those games and get them something that is healthy for them.
Outdoors.
Outside, sunlight, outdoors.
Outdoors is really an incredible, I don't know, call it what you want. It's a tool, it's medicine, it is quality time. You can call it a million different things, but it is so important. And the way that you grew up, the way that I grew up, people of if you're over 40, you basically grew up outside without a phone, without any communication with your parents for the entire day. I mean, I would just ride my bike all over the place, everywhere. And I was just supposed to be back by dinner time. That's it. And, it's not really like that as much, but I don't know that it was better necessarily, but I do think that I was certainly much more in touch with the natural world than a lot of kids today. And I think it's really helpful to get people outside. That's for certain. And fishing is a great tool for that, to get them outside and get them exposed, because you're learning so much about so many different things. You're learning about the bait, you're learning about the fish, you're learning about the plants, you're learning about, the water, everything. You're learning about it all. And it's interesting. And even if they just sit there, like little kids, just sit there and play in the bait well, that's fine. That's cool. Play in the bait well, grab the shrimp, grab the pilchards, whatever you want to do, as long as you're out here and we're together. That's important and awesome.
What I tell a lot of the parents is, not every kid is born to be a baseball player or a football player. They don't have the talent, or a soccer player. But any kid can be an angler.
That's right.
You don't need a talent to fish. It's natural.
Mm-hmm. And it's lifelong too. You can do it till you're deep into your 90s. Deep into your 90s. You can continue fishing. That's awesome, man. You got so many great stories and had such an interesting childhood and all based in fishing. It's cool. And I'm sure that a lot of people are going to want to check out your show. How would people see your show, listen to your podcast?
Well, they can go to, I'm on Waypoint. They can go to Waypoint. It's Fishing Adventures Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Then go to YouTube, Fishing Adventures Florida. My live show on Monday nights is called Florida West Coast Fishing Report. And that's on the Facebook page, and it's on YouTube, and it stays on YouTube. And that's basically, I have about 7 captains that send videos in of what's going on up and down the West Coast. And we have a guest on, like you're going to be on next month with us. We got Flip Pallet coming up, I think, next month. We've had Bouncer Smith. So, again, it's just like what you're doing. We're trying to bring experience from the outside that's maybe not local to us, that's fun. At the same time, we're also telling them, hey, on the Florida West Coast Fishing Report, what's going on the West Coast. So if they're going out this weekend, next weekend, they got an idea where the bait is, what's biting, what's moving, what's leaving, everything else.
Gotcha.
But other than that, I mean, it's just, I just love what I'm doing. I don't do that many charters anymore. I got my corporate accounts and all that. I spend more time now. I'm working on trying to get this kids thing going again. The biggest hurdle that you find is not, I would do a kids thing every Saturday if I could in the summer. It's the paperwork involved. You think that, hey, you want to do this? Well, for me to do this at Picnic Island, first, you have to get the city to let you do it. Then they want to charge you for using the space to do this on there. Good thing that the mayor waived that for me. She said, no. But then you still got to take a bond out, which cost me like $400 to be able to host it. Then you got to put everything together. I have great captains. I had 18 captains there last year. So there was never more than 6 or 7 kids in a group. So we weren't trying to teach them. And each captain walked them through how to throw a little bait net, how to cast, all the CCH taught them about the fish and all the information. The FWC was there. They loved to see the FWC because we had 2 officers there. Of course, they had their guns. They had one of their inflatable boats, and that got the kids excited. The mayor being there, I think that helped to bring the parents, because the parents probably wanted to meet the mayor. Mm-hmm. So that kind of helped bring more kids in. And by the time we got through, I think we did a good job. So I'm trying to work on it again for this summer to do a Saturday thing. Because again, if I can get 20% of those kids turned on to being outdoor, that makes me feel good.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, best of luck to that. And, if anytime you get that going and we can put the news out there for you, please let me know. I'd be happy to do that. And because that is the most important thing, is getting the kids involved and also getting the kids involved with their parents. There's a lot of non-fishing families out there that don't have any history of fishing whatsoever. And all it takes is one little weekend, like what you're doing, to get someone started to where they feel comfortable. Oh, okay. Well, this isn't as intimidating as I thought it was going to be. Like, we can just go out here and catch a few snappers off the dock, or we can, catch some bluegills in a pond, or we can catch whatever. And that may be the start of, somebody spending their entire life doing it and teaching hundreds of other people how to fish.
And, it's not all just about catching fish. Some of the things that I used to enjoy, and I try, hey, you can take the kids out and say, hey, let's go catch fiddler crabs to go catch the sheephead. Yeah. And you get the kids out there chasing the little fiddler crabs, putting them in a little bucket, it's all part of it. So it's not just getting them a rod and reel in their hand and putting a piece of bait in the water. It's a lot of the little things that can lead up to it, Yeah. Catching your own little bait, little minnows off the shore, getting a little net, get them a little 3-foot net that they can throw, and they get excited. That makes them, I think it kind of turns them on even more, because now, hey, I caught this bait. Yeah. And I caught a fish with the bait that I caught.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's a huge deal, man. That's great. When you were saying that, I was remembering my little 3-foot net that I had when I was a kid. And I would just go out there and throw that net. I'd catch and release everything. I'd catch them and just let them go, and then throw the net again and catch some more and let them go and throw the net again, and just throw that net all day long.
I mean, I always keep a little 3 and a little 4-footer here, because if I got a bunch of kids, I'll teach them how to throw it. I enjoy, it's just the expression on a kid's face. They're so happy. I don't see that when they're playing these games on a computer. It's a different, it's a different smile. Yeah, I don't know. I can see a little difference when it's related to being outside and fishing than it is when they're sitting behind a computer playing a game.
There's no doubt about it, man. No doubt about it. Well, Sergio, thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate it. It's great to get to know you a little bit, and I look forward to doing your show. And if anybody wants to check it out, go to Waypoint and check out his show. Go to YouTube. What about social media? You got social media?
Yeah. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, everything. It's just Sergio Atanes, and I'll come up, or then go to the website, and that'll take them everywhere. And the website's real easy, realfishing.com.
Realfishy.com. That's a good name. Yep. All right. All right, Sergio. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And we'll be back with another awesome guest like Sergio next week. And we'll see you then.